Welcome to Not Suitable for Democracy. I'm your host, Nick, and today we're going back to talking about Fight the Oligarchy Tour with Bernie Sanders and now Zohran Mamdani, who is currently running to be New York City's next mayor. Now, for those who haven't seen this podcast before, I actually did an episode about fighting the oligarchy back when Bernie and AOC were touring the country together back in April. So this is episode 3. You can check it out on my channel, on YouTube, on Spotify, and on Apple Podcasts. Feel free to give it a listen. It'll give you a good sense of the context and why it was so momentous at the time when Elon Musk and all the billionaires were sitting behind Trump during his inauguration in January, right? There's never been a Fight the Oligarchy type of tour that really took on wealth inequality so head on. And more importantly, 36,000 people, Republican, Democrat, Independent, all walks of life, attended the Los Angeles rally. Okay, that was the most people to ever attend a rally for Bernie Sanders, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and most likely any political rally in the 21st century. So with all of that said, it is a momentous occasion to see Bernie Sanders back on the Fight the Oligarchy Tour, but this time at his hometown in Brooklyn, New York. So isn't it a bit of a homecoming, right? We've got Bernie Sanders now supporting Zohran, the young Democratic Socialist, 33 years old, millennial, progressive, Muslim, immigrant, candidate, Democratic nominee for New York City mayor. So you can see how Bernie's 2016 campaign for president has now come full circle, where this legacy is now encouraging new leaders to rise up and fight the oligarchy and the wealth inequality in our country. If you like what you hear and want to learn more, make sure to subscribe to Not Suitable for Democracy on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. And then don't forget to reach out for any comments, questions, or just to stay in touch. You can follow me on Instagram at NSFD_pod. So with all that said, let's get into it. Now, before we jump in to fight the oligarchy, there is some breaking news specifically with the Trump administration. So as of Monday, September 8th, the Supreme Court has officially ruled 6-3, leaning conservative, that racial profiling is allowed. It is legally justifiable when trying to use Trump's heinous immigration policy in the state of California. So for context, we know that immigrants all around the country are being deported, let alone kidnapped, and sent to foreign countries, right? Especially where the immigrants are not originally from. And we see the detention center like Alcatraz in Florida, while that had to get shut down, we still see a lot of immigrants get sent to SCOTUS. It's basically a horrible, horrible place, technically in El Salvador. So again, this is where the president of El Salvador has worked with President Trump in an exchange where the Trump administration is paying El Salvador to then host detainees for whoever Trump's administration decides to kidnap and send there. Now, the scary part is that while people were being picked up off the street and sent all over the place in the state of California, there was a lawsuit filed in federal court to stop that. Now, while the lower court, I believe, had blocked it, it was then appealed to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court actually said, in this particular case, using racial profiling, such as looking at skin color, looking at how someone appears, right? Looking how someone is even talking, seeing how they speak the English language, if they're very fluent, or if you can tell they have an accent. All of these different characteristics can be used against people who are American citizens, immigrants, even undocumented folks, because at the end of the day, the Trump administration's main goal is not to create a world that's safe. It is to create their vision of the world, which excludes millions and millions of Americans. And remember, in Trump's big, beautiful bill that was passed by the Republican Party, they had invested millions upon billions of dollars to ramp up and scale Trump's deportation operation. So this is one of the worst days in the Trump era in his second term, where now the entire system can devolve into picking and choosing very arbitrarily who can get deported and sent overseas to these horrible, horrible torture camps. Now, with Trump's administration at the helm with this deportation ruling from the Supreme Court, please be careful. Tell your friends and family this is horrible, horrible news, but we need everyone to be aware so we can protect ourselves and protect each other, because that will be the only way out of this. Sorry to be the bearer of bad news, but I'd rather you be informed and you stay ahead of the game than find out the hard way, or at least that you could maybe help someone or a loved one before it's too late. I know that's a lot, but at the end of the day, we are going to get through this together. I'm going to keep creating podcast episodes, right? I think it's important to keep people informed, right? We can do the best we can with the information we have at hand. So if you'd like to learn more, make sure to subscribe to Not Suitable for Democracy, right? You can follow on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube, right? Or connect on Instagram, and you can follow at NSFD_pod. In more positive news, I'd love to tell everyone about what has been going on at the Fight the Oligarchy Town Hall in Brooklyn, New York. Now, Zohran Mamdani was joined by Senator Bernie Sanders on Saturday, September 6th. And in this event, right, it was an extension of Bernie's Fight the Oligarchy Tour, which, mind you, as of September 2025, Bernie has held about 30, give or take, 30 events about fighting the oligarchy in like every type of district imaginable. East Coast, West Coast, working class, urban, rural, right? He's had small crowds of like maybe a couple hundred to 1,000, and even the largest he's ever seen, such as LA County with 36,000. So with that said, there is still hope out there. People are still feeling the burn. And now with Zohran, as our Democratic nominee for New York City mayor, right, this just sends a message that the progressive movement is still alive, people are still ready to fight, and we can make a difference together. So during the Fight the Oligarchy Tour, right, there definitely was a lot that was said. I would highly recommend you check out the 80-minute town hall. It's worth every minute if you haven't been following along closely. I want to break this down for you so that if you don't have the time for all 80 minutes, well, I'll just give you the highlights. So first, Zohran Mamdani begins the event really reframing the conversation, anchoring around his affordability message. Zohran won the Democratic nomination by really making the case to New Yorkers that the affordability of New York City is nearly impossible. We live in the wealthiest city within the wealthiest nation in the history of the world. So why can our residents in New York City not be able to afford their rent, their healthcare, the education, and so forth? Now, in addition, tying Bernie Sanders to Zohran's campaign message, right? Zohran revealed that it was Bernie Sanders in 2016 when he ran for president, and 2020 when he ran for president, that really shaped Zohran's perspective on the world. But more importantly, it gave him the vocabulary and the vision that really inspires Zohran to rise up as a leader in his own right. Now, on October 19th, 2019, that's when Bernie held his big Queensbridge rally in Long Island City, drawing a crowd of over 26,000 people. I was very fortunate to be there. It was a wonderful event. It was jam-packed. It was a beautiful sunny day, not too hot, not too cold. I didn't wear a light jacket. I didn't need one. But I guess point being is that it was such a positive, emotional event that I will always remember that for the rest of my life. Now, Zohran will too, because that was the day his campaign for state assembly member was out in the field for the very first time. And Zohran was with a few volunteers asking people at that Queensbridge rally for donations, grassroots donations for Zohran's state assembly member campaign. And the fact that Zohran was canvassing people in line, it really shows that the organizing never stops. Zohran, from his experience hustling as a rapper, right, trying to get his mixtape to people, gave him those skills that translated to campaign organizing, where he could then ask people for donations, right? Ask them to get involved with the campaign. what like a normal awkward experience would really deter someone from making that ask, right? Zohran had the ability and the confidence, which is fast forward, he won that election for state assembly, and now he won the election for Democratic primary for New York City mayor. So, long story short, Zohran did a great job tying in Bernie's, message about organizing, building community, meeting people where they're at, and more importantly, how we can fight the oligarchy and wealth inequality by doing it together. So then after that, Bernie came on the stage, right? And he had some really wise words to say. Now, Bernie's message was a lot, I don't want to say newer, but he really did a really good job weaving in the Fight the Oligarchy Tour message, right? Leaning into the oligarchy while also bringing it back home to his core message. Now, Bernie's core message has been the same since like the 80s, the 90s, 2016 presidential run, and 2020. And that is, because we live in a country with so much wealth inequality, right? Why does the 1% of America, the richest of the rich, own more of the wealth than the bottom half of our country? That, in and of itself, should make people's heads explode just because it is so unfair, it is unjust, and there really isn't a good reason why we need to have people starve, go into medical debt, right? Lose their homes, get evicted, all of this. There's just no reason why that needs to be happening, why very few people, there's 600 billionaires in America. Just the idea of the super, super, super wealthy are able to take care of themselves and have enormous power in our economy, in our politics, our government, right? But again, while people are struggling to survive, it's morally not right. So Bernie did a great job hammering that home. Some points he made. Number one, Bernie made a really great point, and this was a key messaging strategy that I think I would love to see more progressives and more elected officials lean into. Bernie goes on to say that psychologists have made the consensus that a child age 0 to 4, that developmental stage is super, super, super important. So because of that, if we support the children, right, then we truly support America. Because our children eventually go up, right, and they go on to do great things. So I love that message, or that point, because Bernie is essentially tying it back to Trump's America First message. Now, I'm not saying Bernie is like an alt-right Republican, but what I am saying is the America First message that Trump used to galvanize the MAGA movement, right? There was a lot of buy-in for that. With Bernie, he's saying, well, if that is true, that we should be taking care of our own, especially the children, then think of it this way. If we support the children, then we support America. And if we truly support America and the children, then why do we not have universal child care? Why do we not have access to health care? And in Bernie's case, Medicare for all that guarantees every American health care. Why do we not have affordable college or education? Why do we not have, affordable homes where we can actually put a roof above our heads to raise those families, right? Those are the issues that really connect the policy with the vision, with how we can do better taking care of our people. Bernie just laid it out so clearly that you can tell by the audience, they're clapping, they're cheering, because he makes a good point. When you really think about our community, whether you're a Democrat, Republican, progressive, socialist, conservative, right? It doesn't really matter, because being able to afford everyday goods, that is not a partisan thing, right? This is just life, everyday life in America. So if we want to really cut through the clutter of he's a socialist, he's MAGA, just cutting through that and just saying, I want to make sure that you can afford to live a dignified life in America. Because that is what democratic socialism is, at its core, that everyone deserves a dignified life in America. That's what it is. So with that message, I applaud it. I think it's a winning message. I think it's a winning strategy for Bernie to tie it in, especially then tying it into Zohran's affordability message, right? Saying If we live in the wealthiest country in the history of the world, and New York City being the wealthiest city, there is no reason why we shouldn't be able to live a dignified life. That is what is going to win Zohran the election. In addition, Bernie also made two really good call-outs. Number one, Bernie called out. Okay, so let me say it this way. Number one, Bernie called out why President Trump and the billionaires are so afraid of Zohran Mamdani. They are afraid. Now, granted, if you watch the full clip, Bernie does a really good job like singing Zohran's praises, where he's like, oh, he's got a beautiful smile. He's such a charismatic guy. If Zohran is such a great guy, then why are they so afraid? And Bernie goes on to say they are so afraid because if Zohran Mamdani wins the general election to become New York City's next mayor, Zohran will then show the country what is possible everywhere, right? Because if we have someone who is winning on an affordability message in the wealthiest city, in the wealthiest country in the history of the world, then why can't we all have a piece of the pie? Why can't we all live a dignified life? And what is our current government, which is majority Republican held? Republicans, I think, hold the majority of governorships. They hold the majority in the Senate and the House and the presidency. So what are they doing to make sure that we are all being able to afford a dignified life? And the answer is nothing. They're actually making it far worse. If you look at the economy, they are tanking the American economy with the tariffs. They are hurting our trade partners around the world. They are deporting people, as I mentioned earlier, right? Making families unsafe, but also making jobs pull back on hiring, right? Which is why Gen Z, especially the men, are struggling finding jobs, even though most of them actually voted for Trump. So you can see how the Republicans, this is not a good vision. Like they are not fulfilling their campaign promises. Like, no, they're just objectively failing across the board. This is not good. So, right, and plus they're cutting hundreds of millions of dollars in Medicaid. So, like, taking people off Medicaid, right, because they're not going to be able to afford their healthcare access. So, yeah, it's just really bad. Really, really, really bad. So, Democrats like Bernie and Zohran, they are showing an alternate path. This, like, when AOC ran and she won, she was inspired by Bernie, right? Bernie paved the way for an alternate vision. A solid communicator like AOC could then articulate that vision to the next generation of millennials. Zohran is also a great communicator, articulating that vision to the next generation. Zohran's even doing better with Gen Z. So with all of that said, right, we are seeing so clearly now how the alternate vision is ushering in this wave of change, particularly resonating with voters under 45, give or take. Part of Bernie's message that he did a great job, he actually calls out to the end of his speech, is the oligarchy religion. The oligarch's religion is greed. I never thought of it like that, but it's 100% true. If you look at the root of all evil, a lot of people can say it's greed, right? And yeah, sure, people have different definitions, but in this assessment, through an economic populist lens, 100% greed. We see it so clearly with Elon Musk. Bernie called out how Elon Musk is about to get a bonus of like $800 or $900 billion, making him the world's first trillionaire. We should not have billionaires. Why should we ever have a trillionaire? One person having enough wealth to end poverty, to end hunger or starvation, to end a lot of other serious issues, right? That can fund infrastructure that could save our planet, to fund college and education that could really uplift people out of poverty so they can get access to good paying jobs. Like, the fact that one person has enough money and power, right? The fact that he was a part of Trump's administration, unelected, right? To do that, but he's choosing not to. Musk has only used his wealth to enrich himself. And that's got to stop. Anyway, back to the town hall. Bernie Sanders then goes on to, him and Zohran both answer questions in the Q&A session. Now, to be very frank, there were some good questions that were asked. And to be very fair, I don't believe Zohran had the most robust answers. Like, I've been, closely following Zohran, like, since he was running for state assembly member, early days, and then even, like, more recently, running for New York City mayor for the Democratic nomination. So a lot of his talking points I've heard already. Now, that doesn't mean it's bad, right? Like, for me, like, I'm a very loyal voter, like, long time, some long time supporter. So in that case, like, for me, the bar needs to be a little higher, like, personally. But for those who haven't watched Zohran or heard of Zohran as closely as I have, I highly recommend you check out the Q&A. However, I'll give you an example. The first question actually was asked by a teacher, and she wanted to know Zohran's plan for reforming Title VI. Now, Title VI, in a nutshell, was Governor Cuomo at the time when he was governor, Governor Cuomo's move to make public sector workers and put them into a different category so that then the government would not have to be worried about their entitlement to increased wages or their pension plan. So basically, this prevented allowed the government to be like, well, we don't really have to pay you more wages. Well, we really don't have to pay you better pensions, right? And the reason why Cuomo did that is because he was listening to his donors, his wealthy donors, who did not want to pay more into the pension plans and higher wages for public sector workers, specifically New York City public school teachers. So, even off the bat, like, Cuomo's never been a friend of the teachers. But, Zohran's answer, he basically addressed that, yes, we need to change it. Yes, it's, Cuomo is not the guy for you because clearly he created this mess in the first place. And then Zohran proceeds to say, and that's the plan to change it. There was no specific plan. It was just, I'm not Cuomo, so you shouldn't, trust him, but I will get the job done. Now, granted, I get that Zohran doesn't want to be too detailed because then it gets very messy, right? He's going to be under a lot of scrutiny. So if he can keep it high level and simple so people can understand, that's going to work. I'll give you another example, right? So someone asked about, how can Zohran prevent a repeat of what happened to India Walton. Now, a few years ago, India Walton, she had won the Democratic nomination for to be mayor of the city of Buffalo. Now, unfortunately, in the general election, there was a write-in campaign for the incumbent mayor, who was also a Democrat, but he ran in the general as a write-in campaign to take on India Walton. And because he was well-funded and because he was a recognizable name, he actually won. So that gives all of us some trepidation as to, just because Zohran won the Democratic nomination, it's not guaranteed that he will win the general. So Zohran's response was basically saying, well, number one, we're not going to let that happen because we need to fight the oligarchy. But number two, the most important resource that will help Zohran win is your time. Making the case, if you can sign up for a volunteer shift, if you already volunteered, got to do it again. So his answer is volunteer. And that doesn't, put it this way, some people might get a little anxious over that because what's the plan? Just knock on doors, is it going to work? And if you can get 50,000 people in a general election, and Zohran said he wants to see 90,000 people, he just shared out in the blue, he shared that he might not have even informed his field team, but he's like, I would love to see 90,000 people, volunteer in the general election. If we can get those numbers up to 90,000, that would be phenomenal. Which it would be, right? I would love to see that. But then to say yeah, I guess all we need to do is volunteer. It's a very simple answer, but me personally, I'd like to see more, right? More care taken to volunteer, canvas, phone bank, right? What other events can we do? How can we participate? Have those conversations with your friends and family and neighbors, right? Put signs up, make sure you're spreading the word on social media, blah, blah, blah. There's a lot that we could do as the people. And what Zohran, he's not going to share his full campaign strategy in that question. So I get it. It's just a matter of maybe a little more detail would have been nice. This would have been nice. And then lastly, Bernie then after that question, he jumped in. So, gotta hand it to Bernie, right? He then stumps for Zohran and calls out that, well, Zohran Mamdani, he won the Democratic nomination, right? And last I heard, we should be supporting the Democratic nominee. So he basically calls out how a lot of leaders in New York and around the country are not supporting Zohran Mamdani, even though he is the Democratic nominee. And, this is a slight reference, let's say, to Hakeem Jeffries, to Kirsten Gillibrand, to Chuck Schumer, right? The minority leader of the Democratic caucus in the House, and then our two senators from New York, let alone Chuck Schumer, is the minority leader of the Democratic caucus in the Senate. So the fact that these three high profile figures are not endorsing Zohran Mamdani, even though they have all said, like, ad nauseum and pushed for ad nauseum, vote blue no matter who, vote blue no matter who. I get it. Like, we want people to vote Democrat if that's the opposition to the Republicans. And at a time when that was made popular, it was always against Trump. But we need more than that. And like Hakeem Jeffries, Kirsten Gillibrand, and Chuck Schumer, they are resistant to change. They're grasping for the status quo because they are all funded by these corporate PACs and these with outsized influence on our government. So that's why they're not endorsing Zohran, because not only is it a conflict of interest, right? They can't be accepting money from the people who don't want them to support Zohran, but they also don't really care about change because they are benefiting from this change. The stock buybacks and basically are not everyone, but there are members of Congress who are benefiting in the stock market from their insider knowledge in their positions of power on congressional committees. So like Nancy Pelosi is notorious for this, and she's been doing it since the first time she was Speaker of the House. Fast forward back to the point. Bernie calls out the Democratic establishment for not supporting Zohran, who is the Democratic nominee for New York City's mayor. At the end of the day, we need to get out and support Zohran, right? Zohran and AOC and a lot of the other Democratic socialists and progressive leaders fighting for change. This is Bernie Sanders' legacy. Bernie Sanders just turned 84 years old on Monday, September 8th. The fact that his message of wealth inequality and taking on the 1% is what will save our democracy and put it in a much better place than it currently is right now. But we can only do that if we connect, we organize, we mobilize, and we really start having these conversations in a way that bring more people into the fold. Again, Bernie, made a great example about going across partisan lines and just really cutting through the clutter and talking about how can we make America more affordable for everyone. And in Zohran's case, how can we make New York City more affordable for everyone? So between now and November 4th, 2025, I strongly recommend everyone gets out to, if you're in New York City, canvass, right? Go knock on some doors for Zohran. If you don't live in New York City, you can always phone bank, right? If you're a content creator or you like, sharing online, make sure you're creating content, videos, tweets, whatever it is, and talk about the campaign, right? This is how we build a movement, a grassroots movement that circumvents legacy media, such as the New York Times, such as a lot of those horrible interviewers that are not giving Zohran benefit of the doubt at all and are super critical, hypercritical of Zohran's campaign. So please, please, please support Zohran for New York City mayor. The general election is November 4th. And if you like what you heard and want to learn more, then make sure to subscribe to Not Suitable for Democracy on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. Or for more comments and questions, feel free to reach out, and you can reach out on Instagram, and you can follow me at NSFD_pod. Thanks again so much for tuning in. I appreciate your support, and remember, democracy is not suitable without you.